I was on my knees in the rain, begging the woman I thought was a gold digger to give me one more chance. But she just looked down at me, this poor nurse I'd married to test, and said 5 words that destroyed me. I always knew Marcus. Always. Then she drove away, leaving me there with the rain mixing with my tears, realizing I'd just lost the only real thing in my entire fake life. Hello friends, welcome to our story. Before we start, please like this video and subscribe, and tell us in the comment where you are watching from. We'd love to hear from you. But to understand how a billionaire ended up broken and begging, I need to take you back 8 months. To the day I designed the perfect test to catch a gold digger. What I didn't know? She was testing me right back. And her test was so much better than mine. My name is Marcus Holloway. I'm 29 years old and worth $840 million. My family owns Holloway Industries. We manufacture medical equipment across 40 states. By the time I was 25, I'd been engaged 3 times. 3 different women who claimed to love me. 3 women who seemed absolutely perfect until they weren't. The first was Emily Torres. Sweet, humble, genuine. Or so I thought. She was an elementary school teacher who drove a beat-up Honda Civic with 200,000 miles on it. She donated half her modest paycheck to buy supplies for her students whose families couldn't afford basic school materials. When I took her to expensive restaurants, she seemed uncomfortable, preferring small cafes and home-cooked meals. I proposed after 8 months of dating. I'd convinced myself she was the woman who loved me for who I was, not what I had. The moment that engagement ring touched her finger, everything changed overnight. Suddenly, she was demanding we upgrade from my starter mansion to something more appropriate for our status. She wanted a new car, nothing too flashy, just a BMW or Mercedes. She started planning an elaborate wedding that would cost more than her annual salary. I watched the woman I thought I knew transform into someone completely different, someone I didn't recognize. I called off the wedding and paid her $150,000 to sign a non-disclosure agreement and disappear quietly from my life. The second was Rachel Kim, an environmental activist who seemed to live her values. She lived in a tiny studio apartment with secondhand furniture and rode a bicycle everywhere to reduce her carbon footprint. She refused expensive gifts, saying they were wasteful. She wore the same simple wardrobe, shopped at thrift stores, and talked passionately about saving the planet. I proposed after a year of dating. I was certain this time, absolutely certain. 2 weeks after the engagement, I overheard her on the phone with her sister. She didn't know I was home early. Just a few more months of this eco-warrior act, she was saying. Then I'm getting that Maserati I've been wanting, and maybe that beach house in Malibu. I've earned it dealing with his boring environmental lectures. I paid her $200,000 to sign the papers and leave, watched her walk away without looking back. The third was Jessica Martinez, a social worker who spent her days helping foster children find permanent homes. She cried, actually cried, when I bought her a $500 dress because it was too extravagant when that money could help kids in need. She volunteered at homeless shelters on weekends. She seemed to be everything good in the world. I proposed. We set a wedding date. We started planning our life together. Then I hired a private investigator. Just as a precaution, I told myself. Just to be absolutely sure this time. The investigator discovered Jessica had been systematically running up credit cards in my name. Small amounts at first, then larger ones. She'd planned to max them out to around $500,000 and disappear immediately after the wedding, leaving me with debt and a dissolved marriage. I paid her $100,000 just to avoid the legal nightmare and public scandal. After Jessica, I was done. Completely done with dating, with relationships, with the idea of love itself. My father sat me down in his study one evening and said something that would change the course of my life. Marcus, you're testing these women after you've shown them who you are. That's your fundamental mistake. You're giving them the answer key before the exam. You need to test them when they think you're nobody, when they believe you have nothing to offer except yourself. That's when you'll see their true character. That conversation planted a seed that grew into what I thought was the perfect plan. I would become Marcus Holloway, not billionaire CEO, but ordinary medical equipment salesman barely scraping by on $50,000 a year. I'd meet someone, date them as this regular guy, and then take it further. I'd fake losing my job, pretend to be completely broke, work as a street food vendor to make ends meet. If a woman stayed through all of that, if she loved me when I had absolutely nothing, then I would know, truly know, that her love was real and untouchable by greed. It was foolproof. It was perfect. It was exactly what I needed, or so I thought. Because while I was designing an elaborate test for her, she was designing something much more devastating for me. I met Sophie Bennett at a hospital charity gala 8 months before everything fell apart. I was there volunteering as part of my regular guy disguise, just Marcus, the medical equipment salesman who cared about giving back to his community. Sophie was a pediatric nurse in the children's cancer ward. She was 27 years old, with warm brown eyes and dark hair she kept in a simple ponytail. She wore a dress that probably cost $40 from a department store, while women around her wore designer gowns worth thousands. But she wore it with such natural confidence that she didn't seem to notice or care about the difference. I watched her all evening. She didn't network with the wealthy donors who could advance her career. She didn't try to make connections or hand out business cards. She just talked to the children from the pediatric wing who'd been invited to the event. Really talked to them, getting down on their level, making them laugh, making them feel special. When a little girl with a shaved head from chemotherapy accidentally spilled fruit juice all over Sophie's dress, I watched to see how she'd react. Sophie didn't get upset. She didn't even flinch. She laughed warmly and said, "Now we match," because the little girl had similar stains on her hospital gown. The girl's worried expression transformed into a huge smile. That's when I knew I had to meet this woman. I approached her later in the evening, introduced myself as Marcus, a medical equipment salesman. Nothing special, nobody important. "Oh," she said, barely glancing at me while reorganizing raffle tickets. "That's nice. Excuse me, I need to help with the children's raffle." And she walked away. For the first time in years, maybe in my entire adult life, a woman hadn't been impressed by me, hadn't tried to get my attention, hadn't asked what company I worked for or where I lived or any of the subtle questions people use to assess someone's financial status. She just dismissed me as uninteresting. I was immediately completely hooked. Over the next 2 months, I engineered accidental encounters. The coffee shop near the hospital where I knew she got her morning caffeine. The grocery store in her neighborhood where I'd time my shopping to match her schedule. The farmer's market she visited every Sunday morning. She was always polite but distant, friendly but never flirty. She'd chat briefly about weather or produce quality, then move on with her day. She never gave me her phone number, never suggested we meet up, never showed any particular interest beyond basic human courtesy. Finally, after 6 weeks of these casual encounters, I gathered my courage and asked her to dinner. She said no. "I appreciate the invitation," she explained kindly but firmly, "but I don't date much. I've had some really bad experiences in the past. Men who say they want something real, but are actually just playing games with people's feelings. I'd honestly rather be alone than deal with that kind of dishonesty again." I should have heard the warning in those words. I should have recognized the irony. But I was so focused on executing my test that I completely missed what she was actually saying. I didn't give up. I persisted. Not aggressively, but consistently. I brought her coffee at the hospital with a simple note saying I hoped she had a good day. I left a book she'd mentioned, wanting to read at the nurse's station with her name on it. Nothing creepy or over the top. Just small, thoughtful gestures that showed I was genuinely interested in knowing her. Finally, after 6 weeks of this gentle persistence, she agreed to one dinner. "One dinner," she said firmly, looking me directly in the eyes. "If you're boring, or if I get even the slightest sense that you're being fake or playing games, I'm never talking to you again. I mean that, Marcus. I've been hurt before, and I won't let it happen again." "Understood," I said. "Just one honest dinner. I promise." That dinner lasted 4 hours. We talked about everything, her work with children fighting cancer, and how emotionally demanding but rewarding it was. My supposed sales job, and the challenges of working in medical equipment. Our families, our childhood dreams, our fears about the future. She told me her mother had passed away from cancer when Sophie was just 16 years old, that she'd essentially raised herself through high school and college, working multiple jobs to pay for nursing school. That she didn't trust people easily because she'd been let down and disappointed so many times. that she valued honesty above almost everything else because lies had destroyed her ability to feel safe with people. I told her, lying smoothly through my teeth, that my family was solidly middle class, that my father had worked in manufacturing his whole life and taught me the value of hard work, that I'd worked my way through state college, taking out student loans I was still paying off, that I understood what struggling and working for everything meant. Every word was a calculated lie. When I dropped her off at her small apartment building that night, she kissed my cheek softly and said, "You're not boring, Marcus, and you seem genuine. We can do this again if you'd like." We dated for 3 months. Real dates, or at least what appeared to be real. Inexpensive restaurants where we split appetizers, movie theaters where we bought the cheapest tickets, long walks in public parks that cost nothing but time, cooking simple meals together in her tiny apartment kitchen. She never asked about money, never hinted that she wanted expensive gifts or fancy experiences. She insisted on splitting the bill at least half the time, saying she valued equality and didn't want to feel like she owed anyone anything. She seemed genuinely content with simple pleasures, a good conversation, a home-cooked meal, a walk under the stars. I was falling in love, really truly falling in love for the first time in my life. That's when I decided to initiate phase 2 of my test, the ultimate test. I told her I'd been fired from my sales job, that I'd made a terrible mistake at work, missed a crucial deadline that cost the company a major contract, that they'd let me go immediately with only 2 weeks severance, that I'd been burning through my limited savings trying to find another position, but nothing was working out, that I was essentially broke and desperate. I waited for her to make an excuse, to suddenly remember she wasn't ready for a relationship, to slowly ghost me like I'd seen happen to friends in similar situations. Instead, Sophie held both my hands in hers and said, "Marcus, we'll figure this out together. You're not alone anymore. That's what being in a relationship means. You face the hard times as a team." I pushed further, told her I'd decided to start over completely, that I was going to work as a street BBQ vendor. I'd always been good at grilling, I told her, and it was honest work that could pay the bills while I figured out my next career move. She didn't flinch, didn't hesitate, didn't show even a flicker of disappointment. "Then I'll pick up extra shifts at the hospital," she said simply. "I've been thinking about working more anyway. We're a team now, Marcus. Teams don't abandon each other when things get hard. They get creative, and they work through it together." 2 weeks later, standing in front of my BBQ cart in a cheap apron, I proposed to her with a $200 ring from a pawn shop. It was a tiny diamond, barely visible, set in a thin gold band that had obviously been owned by someone else first. Sophie looked at that ring and started crying. "It's perfect," she whispered. "It's absolutely perfect because it's from you. Yes, Marcus. Yes, I'll marry you." We got married at City Hall 3 days later. No fancy wedding. No honeymoon in an exotic location. No expensive photographer or elaborate reception. Just us and 2 random strangers we pulled from the courthouse hallway to serve as witnesses. Sophie wore the same dress she'd worn on our first date. I wore the only suit I'd brought to my rented studio apartment. It was the happiest day of my life. I was absolutely certain I'd found her. The one. The woman who loved me for who I was as a person, not for what I could provide financially. The woman who would stay through poverty and struggle. The woman who'd proven herself through the ultimate test. I planned to tell her the truth soon, reveal my real identity, move us into a proper home, give her the life she deserved after proving her love was genuine. But 3 months into our marriage, my head of security called with information that shattered my entire world. "Mr. Holloway," he said, his voice careful and professional, "we have a situation that requires your immediate attention." Even though I was pretending to be poor, I'd kept a small security team watching from a distance. My father had insisted after a kidnapping attempt when I was in college. They stayed invisible, just monitoring for any serious threats. "What kind of situation?" I asked, wiping BBQ sauce off my hands. "It's regarding your wife, sir. She's been visiting a luxury apartment building downtown, the penthouse level. She has her own keycard access." My stomach dropped. "Which building?" He told me the address. I knew that building. Penthouse units there started at $3 million. The kind of place where the monthly maintenance fees cost more than most people's annual salary. "How long has this been happening?" I asked, my voice barely steady. According to our surveillance logs, sir, twice a week for the past 6 months, since before your marriage. The phone nearly slipped from my hand. There's more, Mr. Holloway. A man lives in that penthouse. Alexander Sterling, real estate developer. Net worth approximately $400 million. Your wife enters the building at approximately 2 p.m. every Tuesday and Thursday. She stays for roughly 90 minutes, then leaves. I felt sick. Physically, violently sick. Get me everything, I said quietly. Everything about their connection, financial records, communications, photographs. I want to know exactly what my wife has been doing. Over the next 48 hours, my security team uncovered information that felt like a knife twisting deeper with each new revelation. Alexander Sterling had been making monthly payments to Sophie of $40,000, direct bank transfers, regular as clockwork, for over 2 years, before I'd even met her. But Alexander wasn't the only one. 2 other men were also making substantial monthly payments to my wife. James Fitzgerald, tech entrepreneur worth $300 million, was sending Sophie $35,000 every month for the past 18 months. Robert Hayes, investment banker worth $250 million, had been paying her $30,000 monthly for over 2 years. Sophie Bennett, the struggling pediatric nurse who supposedly made $60,000 a year and could barely afford her studio apartment, was actually collecting over $100,000 per month from 3 different billionaires. My wife was making well over $1 million a year from sources she'd never mentioned. Money she'd hidden completely while watching me work a BBQ cart in 90-degree heat, while eating cheap ramen noodles with me for dinner, while pretending our biggest luxury was ordering pizza on Friday nights. Then I found something that made everything so much worse. Hidden in her car, carefully concealed under the spare tire in the trunk, was a folder, a thick folder filled with papers. When I looked inside, I found comprehensive background checks, detailed financial reports, and surveillance photographs of me. Professional surveillance photos of me entering and leaving Holloway Industries headquarters. Printed articles about my family's wealth and business holdings. Copies of my actual financial statements that should have been completely private and secure. Handwritten notes in Sophie's distinctive writing that said things like, "Father deceased 2019. Inherited full company control at age 25. Known severe trust issues stemming from 3 failed engagements. Pattern of testing, romantic partners. Estimated personal net worth, $840. Primary vulnerability, desperate need to find authentic love." She'd known exactly who I was from the very first moment we met. The random encounters at the coffee shop, the grocery store, the farmer's market, none of it had been coincidence. Every shy smile, every reluctant agreement to spend time together, every word about valuing honesty and hating games, it had all been an elaborate, carefully constructed performance. She was running the exact same con on me that I thought I was running on her. Except her version was so sophisticated, so perfectly executed, that I'd never suspected for even a moment. While I thought I was the puppet master, she'd been pulling my strings the entire time. But one question consumed me. Why were 3 wealthy, successful men paying her these massive monthly amounts? What did she have on them? Was she blackmailing them? Running some kind of systematic extortion scheme? And was I next? Had she married me to get closer, to find more leverage, to set up an even bigger score? I needed answers. I decided to call Alexander Sterling directly and set up a meeting, not as Marcus the BBQ vendor, as Marcus Holloway, Billionaire CEO. It was time to stop hiding and confront this directly. When I walked into Alexander Sterling's office 2 days later, dressed in a custom suit and accompanied by my attorney, the color literally drained from his face. He stood up behind his massive desk, his expression shifting from confusion to shock to something that looked almost like fear. You're Sophie's husband," he stammered, gripping the edge of his desk. "I am," I said coldly, sitting down in the leather chair across from him without waiting for an invitation. "And you've been paying my wife $40,000 a month for over 2 years. I think we need to have a very serious conversation about exactly why that is." What happened in that meeting would lead me to make the worst, most devastating decision of my entire life. Alexander's initial shock quickly transformed into something else, something calculating. He sat back down slowly, then leaned back in his expensive leather chair, studying me carefully. When he spoke again, his voice had changed. It was lower, more careful, almost conspiratorial. "Marcus," he said, using my first name without permission, "I'm actually relieved you found out. Genuinely relieved. I've been wanting to tell someone about this nightmare for over 2 years, but I've been too afraid, too ashamed." "Tell me what?" I asked, my voice hard. He leaned forward, lowering his voice as if someone might be listening through the walls. "Your wife is blackmailing me. Has been for over 2 years. She has information about some of my business dealings. Nothing illegal, I want to be absolutely clear about that. But things that would look absolutely terrible if they ended up published in newspapers or business magazines. Things that could destroy my reputation, my marriage, my relationships with business partners." My stomach dropped even further. "She showed up at my office one day out of nowhere," Alexander continued, his voice taking on a victim's tone. "She had a folder filled with documents about offshore tax strategies, legal loopholes I'd used, accounting methods that are technically within the law, but would be crucified in the court of public opinion. She demanded $40,000 a month, or she'd go public with everything. Send it to journalists, post it on social media, make sure everyone knew." He pulled out his phone with shaking hands and showed me his banking records. $40,000. Every single month for 24 months. I've paid her almost $1 million, Marcus. And I paid because I'm a coward. Because I have a wife I love and 3 children who would be devastated if their father's reputation was destroyed. Because I couldn't risk losing everything I've spent my entire life building. I felt physically ill. The woman I'd married, the woman I'd trusted, the woman carrying what she claimed was my child. "What about James Fitzgerald and Robert Hayes?" I asked quietly, already knowing the answer. Alexander nodded grimly, his expression sympathetic. "She's running the identical scheme on both of them. Different leverage for each one, different vulnerabilities she discovered and exploited, but the same basic extraction method. Your wife is a professional extortionist, Marcus. A con artist who targets wealthy men, finds their secrets, and systematically bleeds them for money." He paused, letting that sink in. "And from what I can tell, based on the timeline and her pattern, she targeted you because you're the biggest score of them all. $800 million. That's not just money, Marcus. That's generational wealth. That's set for life money." My mind immediately went to something Sophie had told me 2 weeks earlier, her face glowing with happiness and hope. The pregnancy. "She told me she's pregnant," I said slowly, the words tasting like ash in my mouth. Alexander's expression turned genuinely sympathetic. He actually looked sad for me. "Marcus, I hate to say this, I really do, but that's probably part of the con. Either the pregnancy is completely fabricated, fake medical records aren't that hard to obtain if you know the right people, or if it's real, you might seriously want to verify paternity. That kind of trap, getting pregnant to lock down a wealthy mark, is absolutely textbook for this type of operation." Everything I thought I knew was crumbling. Every memory was being rewritten. Every moment of happiness was being revealed as manipulation. "I have proof of everything I'm telling you," Alexander said, sliding a thick folder across his polished desk. "Bank records showing every payment I've made to her. Screenshots of threatening messages she's sent. Surveillance photos of her meeting with various men. Probably other marks she's working. I've been documenting everything for months, gathering evidence in case I ever got the courage to go to the authorities. Though, honestly, I've been too afraid of the scandal." I opened the folder with numb fingers. Everything looked absolutely damning. Bank transfers with notes like monthly payment and as agreed. Screenshots of text messages that seemed threatening, talking about going public and revealing everything. Surveillance photos of Sophie entering multiple expensive apartment buildings and high-end hotels in the city. "Why are you showing me all this?" I asked, my voice barely audible. Alexander met my eyes directly, his expression earnest and sincere. "Because you have resources I don't have, Marcus. You have entire legal teams. You have security infrastructure. You have the ability to fight back against someone like her without it completely destroying your life in the process. And honestly, more than that," he paused for emphasis, his voice dropping even lower. "I'm tired of being a victim. I'm exhausted from paying this woman month after month, year after year. I'm tired of being afraid. And I think that together, you, me, James, Robert, we can stop her before she ruins you the way she's been systematically ruining us. Before she traps you with a possibly fake pregnancy and takes you for everything you're worth. What exactly are you proposing? I asked carefully, my attorney shifting uncomfortably beside me. We expose her, Alexander said simply, his voice gaining strength. We get James and Robert fully on board with providing their evidence too. We compile everything into one comprehensive, absolutely airtight case. Then we confront her with all of it. All the blackmail, all the lies, the entire criminal operation she's been running. And we give her exactly one choice. Return every penny she's extorted from all of us and disappear completely from our lives forever. Or we go to the police with everything and she faces serious criminal charges. Wire fraud, extortion, blackmail. She'd be looking at serious prison time. It made perfect sense. Every word aligned perfectly with what I'd discovered independently. The evidence was overwhelming. When would we do this? I asked, feeling a cold determination settling over me. This weekend, Alexander said quickly, as if he'd already planned this entire confrontation. I happen to know she's planning a trip to some family lake house. She mentioned it in passing during our last meeting. It's isolated, private, the perfect location to confront her without risking a public scene or media attention that could damage all of our reputations. I sat there thinking about Sophie, about the woman who'd promised to love me through poverty and struggle, about the woman who'd seemed so genuine, so perfect, so absolutely real, all a calculated lie, all manipulation, all a long con designed to trap me. I'm in, I said finally, my voice hard. Let's end this before she destroys anyone else. Let's make sure she faces consequences for what she's done. Over the next 3 days, Alexander connected me with both James Fitzgerald and Robert Hayes. We met secretly, always changing locations, always being careful. Both men confirmed every single detail of Alexander's story. James told me that Sophie had discovered evidence of questionable business practices from years ago, things that were technically legal but existed in ethical gray areas, things that would destroy his company's reputation if they became public. He'd been paying her $35,000 monthly for 18 months to keep silent. Robert's story was nearly identical. Sophie had obtained documentation about a failed investment fund that, while not actually criminal, would absolutely end his career if clients and partners learned the full details. He'd been paying $30,000 every month for over 2 years. All three men painted the exact same picture. Sophie was a sophisticated professional predator who systematically targeted wealthy men, discovered their vulnerabilities and secrets, then extracted money through threats and intimidation. They described her as calculating, cold, and absolutely ruthless beneath her warm, caring exterior. We spent those 3 days compiling everything into one devastating presentation. Bank records showing over $2.5 million in total payments across all three men. Screenshots of messages where she'd made veiled threats about going public with sensitive information. Surveillance photos that appeared to show her running similar operations on multiple targets simultaneously. Character testimonies from all three men describing her methods and manipulation. This is absolutely airtight, my attorney said when I showed him the complete file. You could have her arrested today if you wanted to press charges. This is textbook extortion. No, I said firmly. I want to confront her first. Give her a chance to explain herself before we involve law enforcement. Maybe there's some explanation I'm missing, some context that would make sense of all this. Even then, even with all the evidence, some small part of me was desperately hoping I was wrong, hoping there was some reasonable explanation for everything, hoping the woman I'd fallen in love with was somehow real beneath all the lies. I called Sophie that Thursday evening, forcing my voice to sound normal and happy. "Hey," she answered immediately, her voice warm and full of genuine affection. "I was just thinking about you. How was your day at the cart? Did that new BBQ sauce recipe work out?" Every word felt like a knife in my chest. The casual domesticity, the seeming authenticity. "It was fine," I lied smoothly. "Hey, listen, I was thinking about something. You mentioned wanting to spend more quality time together before the baby comes, right? How about we take that anniversary trip to your family's lake house this weekend? Just the two of us, away from the city, away from work stress. There was a brief pause. Really? I thought you wanted to wait until after the baby was born to do any traveling. You said you were worried about me being uncomfortable. The baby. The probably fake baby designed specifically to trap me. I changed my mind, I said. I realize life is short and I want to spend every possible moment with you. Just us, no distractions. What do you think? That sounds absolutely perfect, Sophie said, and I could hear genuine happiness in her voice. I love you so much, Marcus. You make me so happy. I love you too, I said automatically, the words feeling hollow and false. But as I hung up, I wondered if I'd ever really understood what love actually meant. Saturday morning arrived cold and gray, matching my mood. Sophie was excited, practically glowing as she packed our overnight bags. She talked constantly about baby names she'd been considering, about how she'd already started researching paint colors for the nursery in our small apartment, about our future together as a family. Each word felt like poison wrapped in honey. The 2-hour drive to the lake house felt like an eternity. Sophie held my hand, played her favorite songs on the radio, told me stories about coming to this lake house as a child, with her mother before the cancer took her. She described memories of fishing with her mom, of learning to swim in the cold lake water, of feeling safe and loved in this place. I wondered how much of it was true, how much of her was actually real, how many of the stories she'd told me over the past year were calculated lies designed to manipulate my emotions. When we finally pulled up to the lake house, Sophie looked confused, her happy expression shifting to concern. "Marcus, why are there other cars parked here?" she asked, her voice uncertain. "I thought it was just going to be us this weekend." "Change of plans," I said, my voice coming out colder and harder than I'd intended. "We have some unexpected guests who need to speak with you." The front door of the lake house opened. Alexander Sterling stepped out onto the porch, followed closely by James Fitzgerald and Robert Hayes. All three men stood there, a united front, watching Sophie with expressions that mixed accusation with satisfaction. Sophie's face went completely pale. Her hand moved instinctively to her stomach, to the baby she claimed was growing there. "Marcus," she said slowly, her voice small and confused. "What's going on? What are they doing here?" I reached into our car and pulled out the thick folder we'd compiled. Without a word, I walked over to where she stood frozen and threw the folder at her feet. Papers scattered across the gravel driveway. Bank statements, printed messages, surveillance photos, all the evidence of her crimes. $2.5 million, Sophie, I said, my voice like ice. That's how much you've extracted from these three men over the past 2 years. That's how much you've stolen through systematic blackmail, threats, and extortion. Sophie stared at the papers scattered at her feet, then slowly looked up at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. Was it shock, fear, or something else entirely? Something that looked almost like disappointment? "Marcus, this isn't what it looks like," she started, her voice shaking. "Please, let me explain." "Don't," I cut her off sharply, my anger finally breaking through. "Don't lie to me anymore. I know everything. I know about the blackmail. I know the pregnancy is probably fake. I know about the entire con you've been running. It's over, Sophie. The game is over." "The pregnancy is not fake," Sophie said desperately, her voice rising with what sounded like genuine panic. "Marcus, I have medical records. I can prove this is real. Please just let me—" "With what?" I interrupted harshly. "Forged documents? That's what professional con artists do, right? You create elaborate false evidence to trap wealthy marks, just like you created your entire personality to trap me." Alexander stepped forward, his voice almost sympathetic. "Sophie, just tell him the truth. Tell him how you threatened to destroy my reputation, my marriage, my entire life unless I paid you. Tell him how you've been running this scheme for years on successful men who trusted you. Tell him the truth about who you really are." Sophie looked between all four of us, her expression shifting from shock to something that looked almost like disappointment, sadness. Her eyes settled on me last, holding my gaze for a long, painful moment. "You believe them?" she asked quietly, her voice barely above a whisper. "You actually believe them over me? Over your wife? Over the woman carrying your child?" "I believe documented evidence," I said, gesturing to the papers at her feet. Bank transfers don't lie, Sophie. Screenshots of your threatening messages don't lie. Surveillance photos don't lie. You've been taking money from these men for years. Those are indisputable facts. Sophie slowly bent down and picked up one of the bank statements. She looked at it carefully, then looked back at me, and something in her expression had changed. The fear was gone. In its place was something harder, something that looked almost like steel. "And where does this money go, Marcus?" she asked, her voice getting steadier, stronger. "Did they tell you that part? Did they explain what actually happens to every single dollar they pay me?" James spoke up quickly before I could respond. "She keeps it, obviously. She's been building her nest egg, preparing for the big score. She married you to get closer, and she'll bleed you dry in the divorce and take half of everything you own. That's the end game." Sophie actually laughed. It was a bitter, broken sound that sent unexpected chills down my spine. "Of course that's what they told you," she said, her voice growing stronger with each word. "Of course they painted themselves as innocent victims. That's what powerful men do, isn't it, Marcus? They destroy people's lives and then cry victim when someone finally holds them accountable for their actions." "What are you talking about?" I demanded, confused by her sudden change in demeanor. Sophie looked directly at me, and for the first time since I'd known her, I saw something fierce and absolutely unbreakable in her eyes. "Did Alexander tell you about Victoria?" she asked calmly, her voice steady as stone. Alexander's face went completely white. His confident posture collapsed. "That has nothing to do with," he started desperately. "Victoria Marshall," Sophie continued, speaking over him, her voice clear and strong. 24 years old, engaged to Alexander Sterling. Died in a car accident 5 years ago on a rainy Tuesday night. She paused, letting the name hang in the air between us. "Except, it wasn't really an accident, was it, Alexander? You were driving drunk. You were behind the wheel with a blood alcohol content of 0.6. Well, above the legal limit. You ran a red light at 60 miles an hour and crashed into a concrete barrier. Victoria died instantly. But you walked away with barely a scratch." The world seemed to stop spinning. I looked at Alexander, whose face had gone from white to gray. That's a lie," Alexander stammered, but his voice carried no conviction. "That's a complete fabrication. And then your father made it all disappear," Sophie continued relentlessly. "He paid off police officers. He bribed witnesses to change their statements. He had the police report altered to make it look like Victoria was driving alone, like she'd lost control of the car. He made sure his son, his precious son who just killed someone through his own reckless negligence, faced absolutely no consequences. I couldn't breathe, couldn't think. The evidence we'd compiled, the victim story Alexander had told me, it was all inverting, transforming into something completely different. And that $40,000 a month, Marcus, Sophie's voice softened slightly but lost none of its strength. Every single penny goes directly into an educational trust fund for Victoria's younger sister, Emma. She's in medical school now at Johns Hopkins because of that money. She's in her first year of residency, specializing in emergency medicine. She's going to save lives, maybe hundreds of lives over her career, because I forced Alexander to pay for the life he took and then covered up. My legs felt weak. I looked at Alexander, who couldn't meet my eyes. "Is this true?" I asked him, my voice barely audible. Alexander opened his mouth, closed it, opened it again. Finally, he said quietly, "It was an accident. I didn't mean to." "You drove drunk," Sophie's voice cracked with emotion. "You made a choice to get behind the wheel, knowing you were impaired. You made a choice to speed. You made a choice that killed an innocent woman, and then you made another choice, to let your father make it all disappear, so you'd face no consequences whatsoever." She turned to James Fitzgerald, and I saw tears starting to stream down her face. "And James, should we tell Marcus about David Chen? Should we talk about the brilliant programmer who spent 3 years developing revolutionary code, only to have you steal it, copy it, patent it under your own name, and build a billion-dollar company from his innovation while he lost everything?" James looked like he might be sick. His face had gone pale, and he was gripping the porch railing. "David took his own life when his startup collapsed," Sophie said, her voice thick with emotion. "He jumped off a bridge 6 years ago because he'd lost everything. His company, his life's work, his purpose. He left behind a wife and 2 young children who suddenly had nothing." She looked back at me, tears flowing freely now. The $35,000 a month goes to David's widow, Michelle, and their 2 kids. It pays for their housing. It pays for the children's education. It gives them the future that James destroyed when he stole David's work and became a billionaire from someone else's genius. I felt like the ground was dissolving beneath my feet. Sophie turned to Robert Hayes, who was staring at the ground, unable to look at anyone. And Robert, should we discuss the retirement accounts? Should we talk about the 67 elderly people whose entire life savings you destroyed with your investment scheme? The scheme that was technically legal but morally bankrupt? The people who lost everything they'd worked their entire lives to build while you walked away with millions in fees and commissions? Robert said nothing, just kept staring at the ground. That $30,000 monthly gets divided between the families you destroyed, Sophie said. It's restitution that you would never have paid voluntarily. Money that helps them afford their medications, their housing, their basic necessities after you took everything they'd saved. She turned back to me, and the look in her eyes was something I'll carry with me forever. Not anger, not hatred, just deep, profound disappointment. I'm not a blackmailer, Marcus. I'm not an extortionist. I'm an advocate. I find wealthy men who've escaped consequences for the damage they've caused. I document their crimes because they are crimes, even if the legal system couldn't or wouldn't prosecute them. And I make sure they pay restitution to the people they've hurt. That's my crime. That's what these 3 men convinced you I am. Her hands were shaking as she pulled out her phone. Look, she said, unlocking it and shoving it toward me. Look at my bank accounts. Look at every transaction. You won't find $2.5 million. You won't find any of their money sitting in my accounts. Because I don't keep a single penny. Every dollar goes directly to the victims they created and then abandoned. I took her phone with numb fingers. She was telling the truth. Her accounts showed the incoming payments from Alexander, James, and Robert, and immediate outgoing transfers to trusts, educational funds, family accounts, and medical bill payment services, all in other people's names, not a single dollar kept for herself. The pregnancy, Sophie said, her voice breaking completely now. She reached into her purse with shaking hands and pulled out a manila envelope. Medical records spilled out onto the hood of the car. Is absolutely, completely real. I have records from 3 different doctors because I knew you wouldn't trust me. I knew you'd think I was conning you. Because that's what you do, isn't it, Marcus? You test people. You assume the worst. You prepare for betrayal instead of believing in love, instead of believing in people. She spread the documents out. Official hospital letterheads. Multiple doctors' signatures and medical license numbers. Ultrasound images with dates and timestamps. Blood test results. Everything official. Everything verified. Everything real. I'm 11 weeks pregnant with your daughter, Sophie said through her tears. But you'd rather believe 3 men who have literally destroyed innocent lives than believe the woman who's been eating ramen dinners with you for 6 months. The woman who's been sleeping in a cheap apartment when I could have demanded so much more. The woman who actually, genuinely loves you. I looked at Alexander, James, and Robert. Their faces told me everything I needed to know. The way they couldn't meet my eyes. The way they were slowly backing toward their cars. The way they looked like criminals who'd just been exposed rather than victims who had been vindicated. You used me, I said to Alexander, my voice barely above a whisper. You used me to try to get revenge on the woman who's been making you pay for killing someone, for literally taking a life and then buying your way out of consequences. Marcus, it wasn't like that. Alexander started desperately, his voice pleading. I was trying to help you, trying to protect you from... You used me to avoid accountability for murder, I said, my voice getting louder, for theft, for destroying families. You convinced me to turn against my own wife so you could stop paying restitution for your crimes. But even as I was processing Alexander's betrayal, Sophie was already walking toward her car, her shoulders shaking with sobs. Sophie, wait, I called out, finally finding my voice. No, she said firmly, not turning around. She was fumbling with her car keys, her hands shaking so badly she could barely get them in the lock. You made your choice, Marcus. You chose to believe them. You chose to set up this ambush instead of talking to me. You chose to humiliate me in front of 3 men who have literally ruined innocent lives. You chose suspicion over trust, fear over love. She got her car door open and climbed inside. "Sophie, please." I ran toward her, reaching the car just as she started the engine. "I'm sorry, I was wrong. Please don't leave." She rolled down her window one last time, and the look in her eyes was something I'll never forget. Not anger, not hatred, just complete and total disappointment. "I loved you," she said quietly, her voice hoarse from crying. "I actually, genuinely loved you, despite knowing you'd tested and discarded 3 other women before me. Despite knowing you were broken and paranoid and couldn't trust anyone. Despite knowing your entire relationship with me was based on a lie. On you pretending to be poor to test me. Despite all of it, I loved you anyway." "I love you too," I said desperately, my own tears starting to fall. "Please, Sophie, I love you so much." "No," she said, shaking her head. "You love the idea of me, the humble nurse who passed your test, the poor woman who needed you, the person you could control and feel superior to. But the real me, the woman who fights for people who can't fight for themselves, the woman who holds powerful men accountable when the legal system won't, that woman you just called a criminal, that woman you were willing to destroy based on the lies of 3 actual criminals." She shifted the car into drive, and I grabbed the door, desperate to keep her from leaving. "Don't contact me again, Marcus," she said, her voice firm despite the tears. "My attorney will be in touch about custody arrangements once our daughter is born. But you and me, we're done. We were done the moment you chose to believe I was capable of extortion, but not capable of genuine love. Sophie, I'm begging you." She pulled the door closed, forcing me to let go or risk injury. "Goodbye, Marcus." And she drove away. I stood there in the rain that had started falling. Of course it was raining, because the universe has a sense of dramatic timing, watching her car disappear down the long driveway, watching my wife, my pregnant wife, drive away from me. I turned around slowly to face the 3 men still standing on the porch, men whose lies I'd believed, men whose crimes I'd helped defend. "Get out," I said quietly, my voice deadly calm. "Marcus, listen. We can explain," Alexander tried, taking a step forward. "Get out," I roared, my voice echoing across the empty lake. "All of you, get in your cars and leave before I call the police and tell them everything Sophie's been protecting their victims by keeping quiet about." James and Robert were already running to their cars, desperate to escape. Alexander lingered for just a moment. "Marcus, you have to understand, you were trying to avoid consequences," I said. "That's all you've ever been trying to do. Now get out of my sight before I make sure you finally face some." He ran, and I was left standing alone at the lake house in the rain, having just destroyed the only real thing I'd ever had in my life. Because I'd chosen to believe 3 criminals over the woman carrying my child, the woman who'd actually loved me. I collapsed onto the porch steps and broke down completely. I stood in that rain for what felt like hours, but was probably only 20 minutes. Then I went inside the lake house, Sophie's family lake house where she'd wanted to spend a romantic weekend with me, and I did what I should have done from the very beginning. I investigated the actual truth instead of accepting the convenient lie. I called my private investigator, the one I paid 6 figures annually to protect me from threats. "Victoria Marshall," I said, my voice hoarse. "Alexander Sterling, car accident 5 years ago. I need every single detail you can find. Police reports, witness statements, medical examiner findings, court records, everything. I don't care if it's sealed. I don't care what it costs. Get it." "Sir, that case is sealed by court order. It would require—" "I don't care what it requires," I interrupted. "Do whatever you need to do. I need the truth." 2 days later, a thick package arrived at my office by secure courier. Inside was a folder that made me physically sick to my stomach. Victoria Marshall, age 24, nursing student at Georgetown University, engaged to Alexander Sterling, died at 11:47 p.m. on a Tuesday night when the vehicle she was in crashed into a concrete highway barrier at approximately 60 miles per hour. Initial police reports, the ones filed before they were altered, clearly stated Alexander Sterling was behind the wheel. Blood alcohol testing showed 0.6 BAC. Multiple witnesses at the restaurant where he'd been drinking described him as heavily intoxicated and barely able to walk when he left. Original witness statements from people who saw the crash described seeing Alexander in the driver's seat. These statements had been formally retracted 3 days later, with each witness receiving payments ranging from $50,000 to $200,000, according to bank records my investigator had obtained. The medical examiner's original report noted that Victoria's injuries were consistent with being a passenger, not a driver. This section had been redacted from the final official report, and at the bottom of the file, a recent photograph of a young woman in a white medical coat smiling at the camera. Emma Marshall, MD, first-year resident in emergency medicine at Johns Hopkins Hospital, full scholarship funded by the Victoria Marshall Memorial Education Trust. Sophie's trust, Sophie's money, Sophie's justice. I investigated James Fitzgerald next, my hands shaking as I typed search queries. I found court documents about David Chen's failed startup, TechFlow Innovations. Found the patent applications that showed David's code filed under James's name just weeks after David's company collapsed. Found David's widow, Michelle Chen, who'd nearly lost her house to foreclosure before a mysterious trust fund appeared, providing monthly income of $35,000. Found obituary records. David Chen, age 34, survived by his wife Michelle and children Lily and James Jr., ages 6 and 8. Cause of death listed as accidental fall, but anyone reading between the lines could see the truth. Sophie had named my daughter after David's daughter. The realization hit me like a physical blow. I tracked down Robert Hayes' victims next. Found the class action lawsuit from 67 elderly investors who'd lost their retirement savings in Robert's high-yield senior security fund. Found the settlement that had paid them pennies on the dollar of what they had lost. And then found bank records showing that years later, these same 67 people had started receiving anonymous monthly payments. Not huge amounts, but enough to help, enough to matter, enough to partially restore what had been stolen from them. All from Sophie. Every single penny. She wasn't a blackmailer, she wasn't an extortionist, she wasn't a con artist. She was the only justice these victims had ever gotten, the only person who'd made powerful men face consequences for the damage they had caused. And I'd called her a criminal. I'd believed 3 actual criminals over her. I'd ambushed and humiliated the woman I claimed to love. I spent the next week barely eating, barely sleeping, just compiling everything I'd learned. Then I did something I should have done years ago. Something I should have done before I ever designed my first relationship test. I reached out to Emily Torres, Rachel Kim, and Jessica Martinez, the 3 women I'd tested before Sophie, the 3 women I'd hurt with my games and suspicion. Emily agreed to meet me at a coffee shop near her school. When she walked in, I almost didn't recognize her. She looked healthier, stronger, more confident than the last time I'd seen her years ago. "Thank you for meeting me," I said as she sat down. "I know I have no right to ask for your time." "No, you don't," Emily agreed calmly. "But I'm here anyway. What do you want, Marcus?" "I want to apologize," I said. "Really genuinely apologize. Not with a check and an NDA, but with actual words and accountability. What I did to you, testing you, making you feel like you'd failed at something when the failure was entirely mine. It was cruel and wrong. I'm sorry, Emily. I'm so deeply sorry." Emily studied me for a long moment. "Sophie told me you'd eventually apologize," she said quietly. I looked up sharply, my heart racing. "You know Sophie. You've talked to her?" Emily actually smiled, though it was sad. "Sophie has been my therapist for 2 years, Marcus. She specializes in helping people recover from emotional manipulation and trust trauma. That's her real job. That's what she actually does." The coffee shop seemed to tilt around me. "The nursing?" I asked weakly. "She volunteers 1 12-hour shift a week at the Children's Hospital to stay connected to clinical work and maintain her nursing license," Emily explained. "But her actual career, her real practice, is helping people like me. People who've been used, tested, manipulated, and discarded by people who claim to love them but were really just protecting themselves from vulnerability." She pulled out her phone and showed me a website. Second Chances Counseling Center. Founded by Sophie Bennett, LMFT, licensed marriage and family therapist. There was Sophie's photo, professional but warm. And underneath, a mission statement that made my chest ache. "We believe everyone deserves love that isn't a transaction. Love that isn't a test. Love that doesn't come with conditions and hoops to jump through. Love that's simply love. The money from Alexander, James, and Robert, Emily continued gently, partially funds her practice. She provides free therapy to victims of financial abuse, emotional manipulation, gaslighting, and relationship trauma. She's helped over 60 people in the past 3 years. People who couldn't afford therapy otherwise. People who needed someone to believe them and help them heal. I couldn't speak, couldn't even form words. Everything you thought you knew about her, Emily said, her voice kind despite everything I'd done to her, was real, Marcus. The nurse persona wasn't fake. She really is a nurse. She just does it as volunteer work. The woman who loved you through fake poverty, that was genuine. The woman who's carrying your child, that's real too. Sophie is exactly who she appeared to be. You just couldn't believe it because you've spent so long assuming everyone is lying. She stood up to leave, then paused. For what it's worth, Marcus, I think she actually fell in love with you. She told me it complicated everything for her, professionally, ethically, emotionally, made her question her own boundaries and methods. She wasn't supposed to fall for you, but she did. And that scared her almost as much as your testing scared you. Then why won't she talk to me? I asked desperately. Why won't she let me apologize and fix this? Emily looked at me with something that might have been pity. Because you chose 3 criminals over her, Marcus. When it mattered most, when you had to choose between fear and trust, you chose fear. You had evidence of her character, evidence of her genuine love, evidence of everything she actually is. And you still believed the worst. That's not something you fix with an apology. That's something you fix by fundamentally changing who you are. How? I whispered. How do I do that? You do the work, Emily said simply. Real, hard, painful work. Not to get her back, you might never get her back, but to become someone who won't hurt the next person. You go to therapy, you make genuine amends to the people you've hurt. You change fundamentally who you are at your core. You learn to lead with trust instead of fear. And maybe, someday she'll believe that change is real and lasting. She walked away, leaving me sitting there alone with my cold coffee and my crushing regret. That afternoon, I started calling therapists. 4 months passed. 4 long, painful months of intensive therapy 3 times a week. 4 months of unpacking trauma I didn't even know I was carrying. 4 months of facing uncomfortable truths about myself. My therapist, Dr. Sarah Chen, didn't let me hide behind excuses or intellectualization. You tested those women because you were terrified of being vulnerable, she said in one session. Testing gave you the illusion of control. If you controlled the parameters, controlled the information, controlled the entire relationship, then you couldn't be hurt. Except that's not actually love, Marcus. That's just fear dressed up as protection. But they did turn out to be after my money, I protested. Emily, Rachel, Jessica, they all proved I was right to be suspicious. Did they? Dr. Chen challenged. Or did they react to being tested? Emily started asking for expensive things after you proposed, after you'd already decided to marry her. Maybe she thought that meant you were ready to share your life. Rachel talked about wanting nice things with her sister in private. Maybe that's just normal human desire that she'd been suppressing around you. Jessica's credit card fraud was real, I'll grant you that. But 2 out of 3? That's not a pattern that justifies testing everyone who loves you. She leaned forward in her chair. And even if they were gold diggers, Marcus, the way you handled it was cruel. You made them feel like they'd failed an audition, like love was something they had to earn through performance. That's not protecting yourself. That's inflicting your pain on others. I spent months working through this, working through my father's teachings about trust and wealth, working through my fear that no one could love me for myself, working through the realization that I'd become exactly what I feared, someone who treated love as a transaction. I reached out to Rachel and Jessica as well. Rachel agreed to meet me, listened to my apology, and said she needed time to process before she could even consider forgiving. I told her that was completely fair and that I respected her timeline. Jessica sent a letter through her attorney saying she appreciated the apology but didn't want any further contact. I created a trust fund for her therapy anyway, not to buy forgiveness, but because she deserved support to heal from what I'd done. I started the Authentic Connection Initiative, a foundation dedicated to funding therapy and support groups for people recovering from emotionally manipulative relationships. I personally wrote an op-ed for Business Insider about toxic relationship testing and the real damage it causes. The response was overwhelming. Hundreds of people reached out sharing their own stories of being tested, manipulated, or made to prove their worth in relationships. Each story was another reminder of the damage I'd participated in. I closed down the entire division of my company that had done background investigations on my romantic partners, donated $1 million to victims' rights organizations, started speaking publicly about my mistakes. I changed, really fundamentally changed. But through all of it, Sophie remained silent. Unreachable, I'd tried contacting her once after the first month. Her attorney sent a cease and desist letter. I respected it completely and stopped trying. Then, 5 months after the lake house confrontation, a letter arrived at my office. Not from an attorney, from Sophie herself. My hands physically shook as I opened it. The letter was brief and formal. Marcus, our daughter was born 3 weeks ago on April 15th. Her name is Lily Marie Holloway. She weighs 7 pounds, 4 ounces, and she's healthy, beautiful, and perfect. I'm attaching a photograph and her birth certificate. I'm also attaching information about establishing legal paternity and setting up a custody arrangement. My attorney will contact yours within the week to discuss logistics and support. Sophie. The photograph showed a tiny baby with a wisp of dark hair and the most perfect little face I'd ever seen in my life. My daughter who I'd never met. My daughter who was 3 weeks old, and I hadn't been there. I sat in my office and cried for an hour straight. Then I called my attorney and told him to agree to whatever Sophie wanted, whatever schedule, whatever financial support, whatever terms she proposed. I would agree to all of it without negotiation. 2 weeks later, I had my first supervised visit with Lily at a family counseling center. A professional mediator was present to observe and ensure everything went appropriately. Sophie brought Lily in, and I barely recognized her. She looked exhausted in the way only new mothers do. Dark circles under her eyes, hair pulled back in a messy bun, wearing comfortable clothes that prioritized function over fashion. But she was still beautiful. She was still Sophie. She handed Lily to me without speaking, her expression carefully neutral. The moment I held my daughter, the entire world disappeared. Nothing else existed except this tiny, perfect human who was part of me. "Hi, Lily," I whispered, tears already streaming down my face. "I'm your dad, and I'm so sorry it took me this long to meet you. I'm sorry I wasn't there when you were born. I'm sorry for so many things." Lily made a small sound, not quite a cry, just a baby noise, and wrapped her impossibly tiny hand around my finger. The gesture felt like forgiveness I hadn't earned. I looked up at Sophie. She was watching us with an expression I couldn't quite read, sad maybe, or wistful, or something more complex than a single word could capture. "Thank you," I said quietly. "Thank you for letting me meet her. Thank you for giving me this chance despite everything." Sophie nodded once but didn't speak, just watched us for the full hour of the visit. When the mediator indicated the time was up, I reluctantly handed Lily back to Sophie. Our hands touched briefly during the transfer, and Sophie pulled away quickly as if I'd burned her. Over the next 3 months, the visits slowly increased in frequency and duration. First, once a week for an hour, then twice a week, then longer visits. Always supervised by the mediator, always professional and focused entirely on Lily. Sophie remained polite but distant. We talked only about Lily, her feeding schedule, her sleep patterns, her developmental milestones, her pediatrician appointments. We never discussed us, never mentioned the lake house, never acknowledged the massive, painful things sitting between us. But I kept doing the work, kept going to therapy, kept making amends, kept growing and changing. Not to win her back, I'd accepted that might never happen. But because Lily deserved a father who understood that love wasn't something you tested, that trust wasn't something you manipulated people into proving, that relationships required vulnerability, not control. Then, 8 months after the lake house, during a routine visit, something changed. I arrived at the counseling center for my regular Tuesday afternoon visit with Lily, and found Sophie sitting in the waiting room, looking absolutely exhausted, more than just new mother tired. She looked completely drained, like she was running on fumes and determination alone. "Are you okay?" I asked before I could stop myself. We didn't usually talk beyond what was necessary. Sophie looked up, surprised I'd spoken beyond our standard greeting. "I'm fine," she said automatically, but her voice lacked conviction. The mediator brought Lily out, and I noticed Sophie wince slightly as she stood up from her chair. "Sophie, are you hurt?" I asked, concern overriding our usual careful distance. "I said I'm fine, Marcus," she said, but there was no heat in her voice, just exhaustion. During my visit with Lily, I couldn't stop thinking about Sophie's face. That exhaustion wasn't just physical. Something was wrong. When the visit ended and I brought Lily back to the waiting room, Sophie stood up and actually swayed slightly, catching herself on the chair. I moved without thinking, steadying her arm. "Sophie, something's clearly wrong. Please, let me help." "I don't need your help," she said, but her voice cracked and suddenly there were tears in her eyes. "I don't need anything from you." "I know you don't," I said gently, carefully. "But I'm offering anyway, not as your ex-husband, not as someone trying to fix what I broke, just as Lily's father, as someone who cares whether you're okay, regardless of anything else." Sophie looked at me for a long moment. Then, to my complete shock, she sat back down and started crying. Not just tears, real, exhausted, overwhelmed sobbing. The mediator quietly excused herself to give us privacy, taking Lily to the playroom. Through her tears, Sophie told me everything. Her car had broken down and the repair would cost $3,000 she didn't have right now. She'd just had to pay for emergency childcare when Lily got sick and she couldn't miss work. Her apartment lease was ending and the landlord was raising rent by $500 monthly. Her practice was barely breaking even because she took too many clients who couldn't afford to pay. She was drowning, trying to do everything alone, and she was just so tired. "And the worst part," she said, looking up at me with red, swollen eyes, "the absolute worst part is that you're here, and you're trying, and you're being better, and I want so badly to believe it's real. But I'm terrified, Marcus, because what if it's just another test? What if this is all just an elaborate performance to get custody of Lily, or prove something to yourself? What if I let myself trust you again, and you destroy me even worse than before?" "It's not a test," I said quietly, sitting down beside her, but keeping respectful distance. "Sophie, I know I have no right to ask you to believe me. I know I destroyed any trust between us. But this isn't a performance. I've spent 8 months in intensive therapy, unpacking why I hurt people who tried to love me. I've made real amends to Emily, Rachel, and Jessica. I've started a foundation to help people recover from what I did. I've changed my entire approach to relationships and trust and vulnerability." I pulled out my phone and did something I'd never shown anyone. I opened my therapy journal app. "This is my therapy journal," I said. "My therapist has me write after every session. Look at the dates, 3 times a week for 8 months. Look at what I'm working on. This isn't for show, Sophie. There's no audience. This is just me trying to become someone better. Someone who deserves to be Lily's father. Someone who won't repeat my mistakes." Sophie took the phone hesitantly and started reading. I watched her face as she scrolled through months of my work, my realizations about control and fear, my acknowledgement of the specific harm I'd caused, my commitment to being better not for any reward or outcome, but simply because it was right. "You wrote about me," she said quietly, still reading. "Every single session," I admitted. "About what I did to you, about the lake house, about how I chose to believe criminals over the woman I loved, about how I'll probably spend the rest of my life regretting that moment and trying to become someone who wouldn't make that choice again." Sophie handed my phone back, wiping her eyes. "Your car," I said carefully. "Let me pay for the repair. Not as anything more than what it is. Lily's father, making sure her mother has reliable transportation. You can pay me back if that makes you more comfortable, or consider it child support, or whatever helps you accept it. Marcus." "And the rent increase," I continued. "Let me cover it for 6 months while you build your practice. You're doing important work, Sophie. You're helping people heal from trauma. That work matters. And you shouldn't have to choose between helping people and keeping a roof over Lily's head." "I don't want your money," Sophie said, but her voice was soft, not angry. "I know," I said, "but I want Lily's mother to not be overwhelmed and exhausted. I want you to have the space to do the important work you do, And selfishly, I want to help because it's one of the few things I actually can do. Please, let me do this one thing." Sophie was quiet for a long time, just sitting there holding her head in her hands. Finally, she said, "I saw your op-ed, the one about relationship testing and the harm it causes." "You did?" "Emily sent it to me," Sophie said. "She said you'd really changed, that your apology to her was genuine, and that the foundation you started is actually helping people. She said you're not the same person who hurt her 3 years ago." She looked at me directly. "I also know about the therapy funds you set up for Rachel and Jessica. I know you're funding support groups across 5 states now. I know you shut down your entire investigative division. I know you've been doing the work, Marcus. I've been keeping track." "You have?" "Of course I have," Sophie said, her voice cracking again. "You're Lily's father, and you were the first man I've ever actually fallen in love with. Did you think I could just stop caring about whether you were okay, whether you were growing, whether the change was real?" She picked up her purse and stood, collecting Lily from the mediator. "I need time," she said quietly. "Time to think, time to process, time to figure out if I can ever trust you again, or if the wound is too deep to ever fully heal." "Take all the time you need," I said. "I'm not going anywhere. I'll be here for Lily always, and if you ever decide you're willing to try again with me, I'll be here for that too." Sophie nodded, started to leave, then stopped at the door and turned back. "Thank you," she said softly, "for the offer about the car and rent. I'll think about it." "And Marcus?" "Yes. Thank you for actually doing the work, for really changing instead of just saying you would. That matters. Even if we never get back together, that matters." She left, taking Lily with her, but something had shifted, something small but significant, something that felt like the first crack in a very thick wall. 3 weeks later, Sophie called me, not her attorney, her. "The car repair is done," she said, her voice uncertain. "Can you meet me tomorrow to talk about the invoice and everything?" "Of course," I said, trying to keep the hope out of my voice. "Wherever and whenever works for you." We met at a small coffee shop halfway between our apartments. Neutral ground. Sophie was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table with 2 cups of coffee and the repair invoice laid out in front of her. "I got you your usual," she said as I sat down. "Black with 1 sugar. I hope that's still right." The fact that she remembered hit me harder than it should have. "It's still right," I said. "Thank you." Sophie slid the invoice across the table. $3,200 total for brake replacement, new tires, and some electrical work. I pulled out my phone to transfer the money immediately. "Wait," Sophie said, her hand hovering over mine without quite touching. "I want to pay you back, over time, in monthly installments. I've worked out a budget and I can do $300 a month. It'll take a while, but I need to do this on my own terms, Marcus. I need to know I can stand on my own 2 feet while also accepting help when I need it. Does that make sense?" "It makes perfect sense," I said. "Whatever terms you're comfortable with." I transferred the full amount to the repair shop, and we set up a payment plan that was completely manageable for her budget. Then Sophie did something I didn't expect. She didn't leave. She took a sip of her coffee and looked at me with an expression I couldn't quite read. "Can I ask you something?" she said. "Anything?" "Why did you believe them?" Her voice was quiet but steady. "At the lake house, you had evidence of who I really was. You could have investigated first, talked to me, given me a chance to explain, but you chose to believe Alexander, James, and Robert immediately. Why?" I'd known this question was coming eventually. I'd prepared for it in therapy, had talked through it with Dr. Chen dozens of times. "Because I was looking for proof that you'd fail," I said honestly, forcing myself to meet her eyes. "Not consciously. I didn't wake up that morning planning to sabotage us. But deep down, in a place I didn't even want to admit existed, I was waiting for you to turn out to be like the others. When Alexander presented me with evidence that confirmed my worst fears, I grabbed onto it because it felt safer than believing I'd actually found something real." I took a breath. I was more afraid of being vulnerable, of truly trusting someone, than I was committed to knowing the truth. And that's completely on me. That's my damage, my fear, my failure, not yours. You did nothing wrong, Sophie. You loved me honestly, and I repaid that by believing the absolute worst about you. Sophie was quiet for a long moment, processing this. I fell in love with you too fast, she admitted quietly. It wasn't supposed to happen. I was supposed to observe you, document your patterns of testing women, maybe write a professional case study about men who treat relationships like auditions. Emily had told me about you years ago, what you'd done to her, how it had damaged her ability to trust. I was angry on her behalf, so when I saw you at that charity gala, I recognized you from photos Emily had shown me. I thought I'd observe you, document your behavior, maybe eventually confront you about your pattern. She smiled sadly. But then you were genuinely kind to the children at the hospital. You volunteered without expecting recognition or praise. You seemed humble and real when I thought you were just a sales rep. And I started to wonder if maybe people could change, if maybe you weren't just your worst behaviors, if maybe there was someone decent underneath all the fear and testing. So you married me as what? An experiment? A study? I asked, trying to keep any accusation out of my voice. No, Sophie said firmly. By the time we got married, I loved you, really, genuinely loved you. The study was over. I'd abandoned that idea months earlier. I was just me. A woman in love with a complicated man who was trying to be better than his fear. A woman who thought maybe we could help each other heal. She paused, looking down at her coffee. And then the lake house happened, and I realized maybe you couldn't change after all. Maybe fear would always win. Maybe I'd been foolish to think love could be stronger than trauma. I don't blame you for thinking that, I said. I proved it that day. I proved that when it mattered most, I'd choose fear over faith. But you've been proving something different ever since, Sophie said, finally looking up at me. The therapy, the foundation, the real, genuine amends to Emily, Rachel, and Jessica. Emily tells me you're actually different now, that the change is real and deep, not just surface performance. I'm trying to be, I said, every single day. Not to get you back, I accepted that might never happen. But because Lily deserves better, because the people I hurt deserve better, because I deserve to be better than I was. We sat in silence for a moment, both of us processing. I don't know if I can trust you again, Marcus, Sophie said finally, her voice thick with emotion. I don't know if we can ever be anything more than Lily's parents. The wound you created at that lake house, it cut really deep, deeper than I even knew at the time. I understand, I said, meaning it. But, she continued, and my heart jumped at that word, maybe we could try being friends first. Real friends, not just co-parents exchanging information about Lily. Friends with no agenda, no tests, no expectations beyond basic human decency and honesty. Hope bloomed in my chest, but I kept my voice carefully steady. I would really like that. Then let's start there, Sophie said. Let's see if we can rebuild some kind of trust as friends, as two people who care about each other's well-being beyond just being Lily's parents. And maybe, someday in the future, if that foundation proves solid enough, we'll see what could be built on top of it. No pressure, I said. No timeline, no expectations, just honest effort and genuine friendship. Honest effort and genuine friendship, she agreed. We talked for another hour. Really talked, not about Lily, but about ourselves. Our weeks, our work, our lives. It felt natural and easy in a way nothing had felt easy in months. When we finally left the coffee shop, Sophie paused on the sidewalk. Same time next week? She asked. Just coffee, just talking, just this. I'd like that, I said. She smiled, small and tentative, but genuine. Then she walked to her car, and I walked to mine. It wasn't love, it wasn't even close to love, but it was a beginning. Over the next 6 months, Sophie and I slowly became friends, real friends. We met for coffee every week to discuss Lily, and those meetings gradually got longer. We started talking about our days, our work, our lives beyond co-parenting. Sophie told me about difficult cases at her counseling practice, about clients who were making breakthroughs and clients who were struggling. I told her about the foundation, about support groups we were funding, about people who'd reached out to share their healing stories. We celebrated Lily's first birthday together, just the three of us in Sophie's small apartment, eating grocery store cake and watching Lily destroy a pile of wrapped presents. It felt domestic and normal and achingly bittersweet. We started having family dinners once a week. Nothing fancy, usually takeout spread across Sophie's living room floor while Lily played with her toys. We'd talk, laugh, occasionally disagree about parenting approaches, and then work through those disagreements with respect and compromise. We rebuilt trust slowly, carefully, honestly. One conversation at a time, one shared moment at a time, one kept promise at a time. I never pushed for more, never hinted at wanting to be together again. Just showed up consistently, honestly, as a friend and co-parent. And then, 10 months after the lake house confrontation, on a random Tuesday evening, while we were giving Lily a bath together, Sophie said something that changed everything. "I forgive you, Marcus." I looked up from where I was making Lily laugh with rubber bath toys, water splashing everywhere. "What?" "I forgive you," Sophie repeated, her voice steady and sure. "For the lake house, for believing them over me, for all of it. I forgive you." My eyes immediately filled with tears. "I don't know if I forgive myself yet," I said honestly. "That's okay," Sophie said gently. "Forgiveness isn't a destination, it's a journey. Self-forgiveness is often the hardest part. But I wanted you to know that I'm letting it go. I'm choosing to believe in who you're becoming, rather than holding on to who you were." Lily splashed water enthusiastically, soaking both of us and breaking the heavy emotional moment. We both laughed, and Sophie grabbed a towel to dry Lily off. "Does this mean—" I started, not sure how to finish the question without pressuring her. "It means I'm willing to try," Sophie said, wrapping Lily in a fluffy towel. "Really try, not as friends, not as just co-parents, as us, together, as a couple trying to build something real. If you still want that." "I want that more than anything," I said, my voice thick with emotion. "Then we start fresh," Sophie said firmly. "No more secrets, no more tests, no more fear-based decisions. We communicate honestly even when it's hard. We go to couples therapy alongside our individual therapy. We build something based on trust instead of trying to protect ourselves from being hurt." "No more fear," I agreed. She leaned over the bathtub and kissed me, soft, tentative, but real, full of possibility and hope and the promise of something genuine. Lily clapped her wet, soapy hands together, making us both laugh again. "She approves," Sophie said, smiling. "Smart kid," I said. "Takes after her mother." That was 3 years ago. Sophie and I got married again. A real wedding this time. Small and intimate, but real. Emily, Rachel, and Jessica were all invited. All 3 came, which felt like a miracle I hadn't earned, but was profoundly grateful for. Emily gave a speech about forgiveness and second chances that made everyone cry. She talked about how healing isn't linear, how people can genuinely change, how sometimes the people who hurt us the most can become the people who teach us the most important lessons about grace. We didn't invite Alexander, James, or Robert, but I learned later that all 3 of them had voluntarily turned themselves in to law enforcement, making public confessions about their past actions as part of negotiated plea deals that included restitution payments to their victims. Victoria's family finally got justice. Emma Marshall, now Dr. Emma Marshall, sent Sophie a beautiful letter thanking her for never letting her sister be forgotten, for making sure Victoria's death meant something, for giving Emma the education that was allowing her to save lives. David Chen's widow, Michelle, spoke at our wedding reception about the importance of accountability and how Sophie had given her family hope when they'd had none. David's children, now teenagers, were thriving in school with full college scholarships waiting for them. The elderly victims of Robert's scheme pooled their resources and sent us a handmade quilt as a wedding gift, with a note that said, "For the couple who believes in making things right." Our foundation in Sophie's counseling practice merged into something bigger and more impactful, the Second Chances Network. We now operate in 15 states, providing free therapy, support groups, legal advocacy, and financial counseling for people recovering from all forms of emotional manipulation, financial abuse, and relationship trauma. Lily is 3.5 years old now. She's smart, funny, fiercely independent, and has her mother's incredible sense of justice. Last week, she made me apologize to her stuffed elephant for not respecting his boundaries when I moved it without asking. Sophie nearly died laughing while I gave a very serious apology to a plush toy, I still go to therapy twice a week. Sophie goes weekly. We do couples therapy twice a month, just to maintain the honest, open communication we've worked so hard to build. We're not perfect. We disagree, we have hard days, we sometimes slip into old patterns. But we catch ourselves, and we course correct together. Last week, something happened that reminded me how far we've come. A young man came to my office, 26 years old, wealthy family, recently engaged. He said he'd heard about me through business circles and wanted advice. I love my fiancée, he said, sitting across from my desk. But I need to know if she really loves me or just my money. I was thinking about testing her. Maybe pretending I lost everything, seeing if she stays. I heard you used to do this. I wanted to know if it works. I looked at this kid, and he was a kid, despite being in his 20s, and saw myself at his age, scared, controlling, convinced that love had to be earned through tests and proof. Sit down, I said. I'm going to tell you a story. I spent 2 hours telling him everything, about Emily, Rachel, and Jessica, and how I damaged them, about Sophie, and how I'd nearly lost her and Lily forever, about the lake house and believing criminals over the woman I loved, about the long, painful work of actually changing instead of just protecting myself. But you ended up together, he said when I finished. So it worked out in the end, right? No, I said firmly. It didn't work out because of my tests. It worked out despite them. We ended up together because we both did years of painful work to heal the damage we'd caused each other. Because Sophie was willing to forgive when I didn't deserve it. Because I was willing to actually change instead of just apologizing. It worked out because we got incredibly lucky, and we both could have easily chosen to stay broken and apart. I pulled up photos on my phone, me and Sophie at our second wedding, Lily covered in birthday cake, Emily speaking at one of our foundation events about her healing journey. You want to know if your fiancé loves you or for your money? I asked. Here's a radical idea. Ask her. Have an actual honest conversation. Talk about a prenup if you're genuinely worried about protecting assets. But don't create an elaborate lie that will make her question whether anything in your relationship was ever real. The young man sat there processing this. What if she leaves when she finds out how rich I really am? He asked quietly, and I heard his real fear underneath the question. Then she leaves, I said. And yes, that will hurt. But at least you'll know the truth without destroying her ability to trust anyone ever again. Because here's what I learned the hard way. When you test someone, even if they pass, you lose. You lose the chance to build something based on honesty instead of manipulation. You lose the possibility of genuine connection. You lose the thing you were supposedly trying to protect. He left my office looking thoughtful. I don't know if he'll listen, but I tried. That evening, I came home to find Sophie on the floor playing blocks with Lily. They were building an elaborate tower that kept falling down, both of them giggling every time it collapsed. How was your day? Sophie asked, looking up at me with those warm brown eyes I'd fallen in love with years ago. Had a visit from my younger self, I said, sitting down on the floor beside them. Tried to save him from making my mistakes. Will he listen? Sophie asked, handing me a block to add to the tower. I hope so, I said. But all I can do is tell the truth and hope it matters to someone. Lily carefully placed a block on top of the tower, her tongue sticking out in concentration. The tower swayed but held. Success, she announced proudly, throwing her hands in the air. Sophie and I applauded, and Lily took a dramatic bow before immediately knocking the tower over to start again. She gets her dramatic flair from you, I said to Sophie. She gets her stubbornness from you, Sophie countered, smiling. As we rebuilt the tower together, Lily directing our efforts like a tiny construction foreman, I felt Sophie's hand find mine. Thank you, she said quietly. For what? For actually becoming the person you promised you'd be, for doing the work even when it was hard, for being honest even when honesty was scary, for being the partner I needed you to be and the father Lily deserves. Thank you for giving me the chance, I said, for forgiving me when I didn't deserve it, for believing I could change when I'd given you every reason not to. We both changed, Sophie said. I had to learn to trust again, to believe that not every wealthy man is hiding something, to accept that sometimes people really do transform. Lily yawned, rubbing her eyes. Bedtime, Sophie and I said simultaneously, making us both laugh. We carried Lily to her room together, going through our established routine. Pajamas, teeth brushing, 3 books, 1 song, lights out, but door cracked open. After Lily was asleep, Sophie and I stood in her doorway for a moment, just watching her breathe. "I love you," I said quietly. "I love you too," Sophie replied. "Even though you almost ruined everything, even though you're still not perfect, even though we still have hard days sometimes." "Even though?" I asked, smiling slightly. "No," Sophie corrected, taking my hand. "Not even though, just I love you, all of you, the broken parts and the healed parts and the parts still healing. That's what real love is, Marcus. Not the parts someone shows you in a test. All the parts. The complicated, messy, real parts." We walked to our bedroom, our shared bedroom in the house we'd bought together, the home we'd built on honesty instead of games. "Do you ever regret it?" I asked as we got ready for bed. "Giving me another chance? Sometimes I think about how much easier your life would be if you just moved on." Sophie was quiet for a moment, really considering the question. "I regret the pain," she said finally. "I regret the lake house and those months of being apart and Lily's first 3 weeks without you there. I regret that it had to get that broken before it could be rebuilt." She turned to face me. "But I don't regret where we ended up. I don't regret this. Us, our family, our life together. Because we know each other's absolute worst now. We've seen each other's ugliest moments, most broken places, deepest fears. And we chose each other anyway. That's not something most couples get. Most people build on a foundation of best behavior and hope the cracks don't show. We built on cracks and mistakes and honest healing. That's stronger than perfection ever could be." I pulled her close. "We're a mess," I said. "The best kind of mess," she agreed. "Lily's going to need so much therapy when she's older." Sophie laughed. "Good thing her parents run a counseling network." We fell asleep holding each other. Two imperfect people who'd learned that love isn't about passing tests or proving worth or protecting yourself from pain. Love is about choosing someone every day, with all their flaws and fears and complicated histories. It's about trust built slowly through kept promises. It's about forgiveness that's earned through changed behavior. It's about vulnerability instead of control. It's about being brave enough to believe in someone even after they've given you reasons not to. That's not a fairy tale. That's something real. And real is always, always better. 3 years after almost losing everything, I finally understand what my father got wrong. He told me to test women before showing them who I was. But what I learned, what Sophie taught me through painful, necessary lessons, is that the real test isn't for them. The real test is for yourself. Can you be brave enough to trust? Can you be vulnerable enough to love without guarantees? Can you build something real instead of something controlled? Can you choose faith over fear? Those are the only tests that matter. And they're tests you take every single day for the rest of your life. If this story moved you, if it made you think about how you approach love and trust and vulnerability, then please subscribe to hear more stories that explore the complicated truth of human relationships. And tell us in the comments, could you forgive someone like Marcus? Was Sophie too forgiving? Or did she make the right choice? Do people really change, or do they just get better at hiding their true nature? We want to hear your thoughts on this complicated journey. Because at the end of the day, we're all just trying to figure out how to love and be loved, how to trust and be trustworthy, how to build something real in a world that often feels fake. And sometimes, the people who hurt us the most can teach us the most important lessons about grace, about growth, and about what love really means when you strip away all the games and tests and fear. Thank you for watching. See you in the next story.